Boardroom smelled like old coffee and nerves. My stepmother sat across from me in her cream blazer, dabbing her eyes with a tissue she'd clearly staged, and my uncle, her brother, leaned over to whisper something in her ear that made both of them glance at me and then look away. The mediator hadn't even called the meeting to order yet. I folded my hands on the table, kept my face still, and waited. I'd been waiting for 8 months. A few more minutes wasn't going to break me. My dad died in February. Not dramatically. He'd had a heart condition for years, and we knew it was coming, in the way you know a storm is building on the horizon and still feel shocked when it finally arrives. He was 61. He loved Tim Hortons double-doubles and terrible action movies and calling me every Sunday morning to talk about nothing for 45 minutes. I miss those calls more than I can explain. His name was Gerald. Everyone called him Jerry. He built a mid-sized commercial property management company out of nothing over 30 years. Managing office buildings in Calgary, a few strip malls in Red Deer, 2 warehouse complexes near Avery. It wasn't flashy. It was steady, careful, patient work, exactly like him. When he died, it was worth just under $4 million in assets and active contracts. He left it to me, not in a complicated way, not in a hidden way. His will was clear, written with his lawyer 8 years ago and updated twice, the last time 14 months before he died. I was the sole beneficiary of the company, the real estate holdings, and a personal trust account that had been accumulating since I was 19. My stepmother Sandra received the house they'd shared in Tuscany Hills, a lump sum of $250,000, and a monthly payment from the estate for 5 years. It was generous. My dad was a generous man. Sandra had other ideas. I should say something about her. Not because she deserves the airtime, but because I want you to understand that she wasn't a cartoon villain. She was smart. She was organized. She had been married to my dad for 11 years, and she knew how to present herself. Warm at family dinners, attentive at his appointments, the kind of woman who remembers everyone's birthdays and brings the right bottle of wine to every occasion. My dad loved her. I believe that. I also believe that what she did after he was gone tells you everything about what she was underneath all of it. Within 3 weeks of his funeral, she filed a request to have a guardian appointed over me through the Alberta Court of Queen's Bench. Her claim was that I was mentally incapacitated, that the grief had broken something in me, that I was making erratic decisions, isolating myself, showing signs of instability that made it impossible for me to manage an estate of this size. She submitted a letter from a doctor, Renau, a psychiatrist I had never met, never spoken to, never sat across from in any clinical setting, stating that based on a clinical review of available records, I appeared to exhibit symptoms consistent with prolonged depressive disorder with psychotic features. He had never examined me. He signed that letter anyway. My uncle Sandra's brother, a man named Keith who'd been circling my dad's business interests for years, was named as proposed co-guardian. I found out about all of this from my dad's lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia who called me on a Tuesday afternoon and said, in a very calm voice, "Avery, I need you to come into the office. Today, if possible." I remember sitting in her office with my coat still on, reading the filing on her desk and feeling something I can only describe as a very cold clarity. Not panic. Not even anger. Exactly. Just this understanding that settled into my chest like ice. They thought I wouldn't be ready. They were wrong. I need to back up a little, because what happened next only makes sense if you know what I did for a living. I'm a forensic accountant. Not the dramatic TV version. Mostly it's spreadsheets, audit trails, tracing the movement of money through accounts and shelf structures and company filings. I work for a firm in Calgary that does litigation support, regulatory audits, that kind of thing. I'm 31 years old. And I've been doing this work since I was 26, and I am, without false modesty, quite good at it. My dad knew what I did. He was proud of it in a quiet way. He used to tell people, "My daughter finds where the money went," and then laugh at his own description. What he didn't know, because I never had any reason to tell him, was that I had been passively watching the financial activity on his estate accounts for almost 2 years. Not because I suspected anything. Because he'd made me a co-signatory on the trust account when I turned 25, and I had access to the statements. I looked at them the way I look at any financial document, out of habit, out of professional instinct. I noticed a few transfers I thought were unusual. I flagged them in my own notes and told myself I'd ask him about it at some point. I never got the chance. After the funeral, I went back to those notes, and what I found over the following weeks, pulling statements, cross-referencing with the business accounts Patricia gave me access to as executor, was not small. It was not ambiguous. It was a pattern that had been running for 19 months, totaling just over $380,000, moving in careful, irregular amounts through 3 different accounts, 2 of which were registered to a numbered company I'd never seen before. One of the directors of that numbered company was Keith. The other was Sandra. I didn't tell anyone. Not Patricia. Not yet. Not my aunt, who called me twice a week and would have exploded. Not my best friend, who was already furious on my behalf and would have said something on social media that would have burned the whole careful structure I was building. I kept going to work. I kept answering Sandra's texts with short, neutral responses. I went to their family dinner at Easter because Patricia advised me not to create conflict. And I sat at that table and ate roast chicken and listened to Keith talk about real estate markets and said almost nothing for 3 hours. Sandra watched me from across the table with this particular expression, assessing, faintly triumphant, and I smiled at her and asked if she wanted me to take the leftover potatoes home. Meanwhile, I was building a file that would have impressed my own firm's senior partners. I documented every transfer. I traced the numbered company 1847-293 Alberta Limited to corporate registry filings, found its incorporation date, 4 months before my dad's last health scare, found the registered address, Keith's accountant's office in Ramsey, found the secondary account it fed into, found that secondary accounts activity showing regular cash withdrawals and amounts just under the reporting threshold. I pulled my dad's business contracts and compared payment schedules against what had actually arrived in the estate accounts. I found 2 active property management contracts where the client payments were being redirected, not to my dad's company but to the numbered company, then laundered out in pieces. I found the emails. That was the part that took the longest. Patricia had to involve the estate litigation team to subpoena the business email server, and we had to do it carefully, through proper channels, so none of it could be challenged later. But we got them. Exchanges between Sandra and Keith going back 26 months. Planning. Adjusting amounts. Discussing timelines. One email dated 9 days after my dad's last cardiology appointment, where Sandra wrote, "If it's sooner rather than later, we need to move the rest before probate." I read that email sitting at my kitchen table in Beltline at 11 o'clock at night, and I had to put my laptop down and go stand at the window for a while. If it's sooner rather than later. He was her husband. He was still alive when she wrote that. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in October. Sandra's legal team had filed extensively the letter from Dr. Renaud, statements from 2 of Sandra's friends claiming they had witnessed my erratic behavior, and a declaration from Keith describing a phone call in which I had allegedly threatened him. I had never threatened Keith. I had barely spoken to Keith in 3 years. The declaration was fiction, written in the clean, careful language of someone who had been coached. Patricia had been preparing our response for weeks. But there was one piece I had asked to handle myself. 2 days before the hearing, I contacted Dr. Renaud's licensing body, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta, and filed a formal complaint, attaching a notarized statement of the facts that this physician had submitted a clinical assessment of a patient he had never met, never examined, never spoken to. I attached the filing. I attached my own records confirming I had no treating psychiatrist, no clinical history with him, nothing. I noted that this letter had been submitted to a court of law as professional medical opinion. I sent a copy to the opposing counsel the morning of the hearing, with a brief cover note informing them that the college had logged the complaint and opened a preliminary review. I want to be honest, I was nervous that morning. I sat in Patricia's car in the parking garage under the court building, and I ate half a granola bar, and I could feel my hands not quite being steady. It's one thing to build a file. It's another thing to walk into a room and put it on a table and wait for the other side to understand what's happening. Patricia looked at me and said, "You ready?" I said, "I've been ready since April." The room was smaller than I expected. A ballroom-style setting. This was a civil matter, not a criminal trial, and it had the atmosphere of something bureaucratic and dry. Sandra was already seated when we arrived, in that cream blazer, with Keith beside her and 2 lawyers arranged on her side of the table. The mediating judge, a procedural appointment at this stage, was a quiet man in his 60s named Justice Arsenault, who wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck and had the general demeanor of someone who had seen every variety of human dishonesty and was no longer surprised by any of it. Sandra's lead counsel opened. It was a polished presentation, the kind built for an audience that might be sympathetic. Grief, instability, a young woman overwhelmed by loss and responsibilities beyond her experience. Dr. Renaud's letter was submitted. The friend's statements were submitted. Keith's declaration was submitted. Justice Arsenault listened. He made notes. He did not visibly react. Then Patricia stood up. She submitted our response in 3 parts. First, the documentation establishing my professional credentials and current fitness, work records, a letter from my firm's managing partner, a statement from my own GP who had seen me twice since my dad's death and noted no clinical concerns whatsoever. Second, a statement from a psychiatrist Patricia had retained who reviewed my actual medical history and found no basis for any diagnosis of the type Dr. Renaud had described. Third, and this was the part I had built, a bound forensic accounting report, 112 pages, documenting every transfer, every account, every email, every discrepancy between what the estate should have received and what had actually arrived. Sandra's lawyer started to object. Justice Arsenault held up one hand. He picked up the report. He put his reading glasses on, looked at the cover page for a moment, then removed his glasses and set them on the table. He looked at Sandra. He said, "Ms. Harlow, before we continue, I'd like to understand the nature of your relationship with 1847-293 Alberta Limited." The room went very quiet. Sandra's lead counsel leaned over to whisper something. Sandra's expression, and I was watching her face directly, I didn't look away, did something I can only describe as collapsing inward. Not dramatically. Just a small controlled implosion, like a building being demolished from the inside. She said, "I'm not sure what you're referring to." Justice Arsenault said, "I think you are. And I think we should take a brief recess while your counsel reviews the materials that have just been submitted, because I have a number of questions that are going to require careful answers." The recess lasted 40 minutes. I sat in the hallway outside on a bench with Patricia and drank terrible vending machine coffee and watched the pigeons on the courthouse ledge outside the window. Patricia was reviewing something on her phone. I didn't talk. I was holding myself very carefully, the way you do when you know something large is about to shift and you don't want to move and disturb it. When we went back in, Sandra's lawyers informed Justice Arsenault that their clients wished to withdraw the guardianship application. He said that was their right. He also said that given the materials now on record, he was referring the matter to the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit and to the Law Society regarding counsel's role in submitting the psychiatric letter without apparent verification. He noted for the record that the College of Physicians in Sursum, Alberta had already been notified regarding Dr. Renaud. He looked at Sandra one more time before we adjourned. He said, "I'd encourage you to speak with a criminal defense lawyer before the end of the week." I'm writing this 8 months after that hearing. The RCMP investigation is ongoing. I can't discuss the details. What I can say is that Sandra has retained criminal defense counsel and the numbered company has been frozen. Keith's accounting firm dropped him as a client 2 weeks after the hearing. Dr. Canton. Renaud voluntarily surrendered his license to practice in Alberta in December, 6 weeks before the college's disciplinary hearing was scheduled. He has not practiced since. The estate is intact. The company is intact. I am still running it, not because I had to, not because I felt obligated, but because my dad built it carefully and it employs 23 people and they did not ask for any of this, and they deserve to have someone in charge who gives a damn. I still go to Tim Hortons sometimes and get a double-double. I don't even really want, just to sit with it for a few minutes. I think about my dad a lot. I think about that phone call I never got to make, the one where I would have told him what I found and watched him process it. The anger, the hurt, the slow understanding. I don't know what he would have said. He was a private man. He kept things close, but he raised me to find where the money went, so I did. I still think about the moment Justice Arsenault set his glasses down on the table. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way someone does when they've stopped needing the document in front of them because the picture has already become clear. Sandra was sitting 4 feet away from me and I watched something go out of her face. Not guilt exactly. More like the particular deflation of someone who had built a plan on the assumption that I wouldn't look closely enough. That assumption was the thing that undid her, not my anger. I wasn't angry, not in the way people expect, not some dramatic confrontation or a moment where I finally said everything I'd been holding back. It was quieter than that. She had decided, somewhere along the way, that grief would make me sloppy, that losing my dad would loosen my grip on the details. She was wrong, and the wrongness of it cost her everything she had been slowly, carefully taking. I've thought a lot about what actually gets people through something like this. Not the version where you emerge victorious and everything is tied up neatly, but the real version, where you're sitting in a parking garage eating a granola bar you can't finish, wondering if the 8 months of work you've done is actually going to matter. What got me through wasn't rage. It wasn't even certainty that I'd win. It was something more unglamorous than either of those things. I just kept doing the next right thing. Pull the next statement. File the next document. Show up to the dinner and eat the roast chicken and say nothing that would give them a reason to move faster than I was ready for. There's something in that I didn't expect to learn from all of this. That integrity isn't really about the big moments. It's about what you do at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday when nobody's watching and you could just close the laptop and tell yourself it's probably fine. It's the decision to keep going anyway, to be the kind of person who doesn't look away from uncomfortable information just because facing it is harder than not facing it. And the intelligence part, I don't mean being smart in some abstract way. I mean the discipline of staying curious, staying methodical, trusting the process even when you can't yet see where it ends. Those 19 months of transfers didn't unravel themselves. I had to follow them step by step without skipping ahead to the conclusion I wanted. That kind of thinking is a practice. It's something you build, not something you're born with. The hardest part was the patience. Sitting at that Easter dinner, answering Sandra's texts, watching Keith talk about cap rates while I knew what I knew. That was the part that cost me something. Not the legal fees, not the long nights with the audit files. The sustained, deliberate choice to wait until the moment was right, rather than act out of the urgency of being hurt. My dad built his company slowly, carefully, over 30 years. I think he understood something that I had to learn the harder way. That the things worth keeping are built the same way they're defended. One careful day at a time. I kept the company. I kept the trust. I kept the thing he built. That felt like enough.